Let me start with something that happened in the last 24 hours. Donald Trump told the world that a deal with Iran was close. Not maybe, not someday, not we are exploring options. Close. And I want you to hold on to that word for the next 25 minutes. Close. Because that one word is doing a lot of work right now. Trump said the deal could be signed soon. He said the Strait of Hormuz would reopen. He said Iran no longer wanted a nuclear weapon. He presented the whole thing like a victory lap, like the war was ending, like Washington had forced Tehran back into the box, like the most dangerous choke point in the world was about to return to normal, because Donald Trump made one deal. Strong words. Very strong. But then Iran did something very interesting. Iran did not confirm the story the way Washington framed it. Tehran did not rush out and say, yes, Trump is right. The deal is done. America won. Hormuz will reopen on Washington's terms. No. Iran slowed the story down. Iran said the timeline was not fixed. Iran said more time may be needed. Iran signaled that the agreement was not ready to be treated like a finished American victory. And that is where this entire story begins. Because one side said deal, the other side said not yet. One side said peace, the other side said terms. One side said Hormuz opens, the other side said who decided the price, okay? That is not a small disagreement. That is not diplomatic confusion. That is the entire battlefield. Because the real question is not whether Trump announced a deal. The real question is why Iran refused to let Trump define what the deal means. And immediately, the media did what it always does. It turned a complex geopolitical negotiation into a clean headline. Deal close. War ending. Hormuz reopening. Trump breakthrough. Iran backs down. Simple, clean, convenient. But geopolitics is not simple, and it is almost never clean. So today, I want to do something that most of the mainstream coverage is not doing right now. I want to put three competing theories on the table. Three theories, same set of facts. Only one framework explains why Trump is announcing victory, Iran is delaying confirmation, Israel is uneasy, Hormuz is still the center of the crisis, and oil markets are watching every word like the next missile has already been fired. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. First theory, I call it the victory lap theory. This is the mainstream version. This is the version you are going to see on cable news. This is the version Washington wants investors, voters, and allies to believe. The theory is simple. America pressured Iran. Iran could not take it anymore. Trump forced Tehran to the table. Iran accepted the deal. The Strait of Hormuz reopens. The war begins to end. America wins. That is theory one. Second theory, I call it the Hormuz leverage theory. This theory says Iran is not surrendering. Iran is converting pressure into concessions. Iran used one thing America could not ignore, the Strait of Hormuz, not because Iran can defeat the U.S. Navy in open battle. That is not the point. The point is that Iran does not need to defeat America. Iran only needs to make normality expensive. Every tanker, every insurance premium, every oil shipment, every Gulf capital, every Asian energy importer, every market headline. Iran turned all of that into leverage. That is theory two. Third theory, and this is the framework I am going to build for you today. I call it the war framing theory. This theory says the deal is not the end of the war. The deal is the war moving into a new phase, from missiles to meaning, from airstrikes to headlines, from naval pressure to narrative control. Because right now, every actor needs the same deal to mean something different. Trump needs it to mean victory. Iran needs it to mean resistance worked. Israel needs it to mean it was not restrained. The Gulf states need it to mean stability. China needs it to mean energy security. And the media needs it to mean the story is simple enough to fit inside a headline. That is not peace. That is a fight over interpretation. Three theories: victory lap, Hormuz leverage, war framing. Let's take them one by one. Now let me start with theory one, and I want to be very fair about this, okay? I do not like when people take the weakest version of an argument and knock it down. That is not analysis, that is theater. So let me give you the strongest possible version of the victory lap theory. Here it is. America is still the center of the system. America controls the sanctions architecture. America controls the dollar system. America controls the naval umbrella. America controls the military partnerships across the Gulf. America controls much of the diplomatic space that Iran needs access to if Iran wants relief. So from Washington's point of view, this is simple. Iran escalated. Iran threatened Hormuz. Iran created chaos. But eventually, Iran had to come back to the table because Iran cannot live outside the system forever. That is the argument. And to be fair, it is not a stupid argument. It explains why Trump wants to stand in front of the world and say, I made the deal. It explains why markets want to believe the Strait of Hormuz is about to reopen. It explains why Gulf states want to believe the worst phase is over. It explains why the media wants a clean ending. And it explains why Trump's political team would love the headline, Trump ends Iran war. That is powerful. Very powerful. But here is the problem. And this is the single most important question in this entire video. So I want you to really pay attention to this. If Iran is surrendering, why is Iran refusing to let Washington write the surrender speech? Think about that carefully. If this is truly an American victory, why is the language still contested? Why is Iran not confirming Trump's version? Why is the signing timeline uncertain? Why are sanctions relief, frozen assets, Hormuz access, and follow-up nuclear details still being discussed? Why is Israel worried about what this deal might restrict? Why are we hearing deal close from one side and more time needed from the other? That is not what clean victory looks like. When one side truly wins, the story becomes simple. The winner announces, the loser confirms. The allies align, the market stabilizes, the media repeats one version. But that is not what we are seeing. What we are seeing is a fight over who gets to define reality. And that is why Theory 1 is incomplete. It explains Trump's headline. It does not explain Iran's delay. It explains America's public confidence. It does not explain the contested terms. It explains the desire for peace. It does not explain why every actor is describing a different piece. So now we have to move to Theory 2, the Hormuz leverage theory. And this is where it gets much more interesting. Because the Strait of Hormuz is not just water. People make that mistake all the time. They look at a map and say, it is a narrow passage. Ships go through. Oil moves. The US Navy protects it. Simple. No. Hormuz is not just a passage. Hormuz is a pressure point. It is a button. It is a warning light on the dashboard of the global economy. When Hormuz becomes unstable, oil traders react. Shipping insurers react. Asian importers react. Gulf monarchies react. Washington reacts. Beijing reacts. Everyone reacts. That is why Iran does not need to sink a fleet to create leverage. Iran only needs to make the world ask one question. Can anyone guarantee safe passage tomorrow? That question alone is power. Because America's entire regional image depends on one promise. We provide order. That is the American offer. You trade in dollars. You align with Washington. You host US bases. You buy American weapons. And in exchange, America protects the system. But if Iran can make the most important energy choke point in the world feel unstable, then Iran is not just attacking ships. Iran is attacking the credibility of the guarantor. That is a much deeper problem. And this is why Trump's deal is so sensitive. Because if the deal reopens Hormuz only after Iran receives something, then the story changes. It is no longer America forced Iran to reopen the strait. It becomes Iran sold stability back to the system. Let that land for a moment. Iran does not need the world to say Iran won. Iran only needs the world to understand that Iran had to be paid, accommodated, negotiated with, or respected before normality returned. That is leverage. And once you see it that way, Trump's announcement looks very different. Because Washington wants to frame the deal as American pressure succeeding. Iran wants to frame the same deal as Iranian resistance producing concessions. Same document. Two different stories. And the story matters because in geopolitics, perception is not decoration. Perception is part of power. Now watch the timing. Trump says the deal is close. Iran does not fully confirm. Reports indicate Hormuz reopening is tied to the agreement. Sanctions relief and frozen assets remain part of the discussion. Nuclear details are not fully settled. Lebanon and Israeli operations remain unresolved. These are not separate stories. They are not random complications. They are all pieces of the same negotiation. Because the deal is not just about ending violence. The deal is about deciding what the violence meant. Did American pressure work? Or did Iranian leverage work? Did Trump force peace? Or did Iran make escalation too expensive? Did Hormuz reopen because America restored order? Or because Iran proved it could disrupt order? That is the fight. And now we come to theory 3, the war framing theory. This is the part I need you to really focus on. Because the mistake most people make is that they think war ends when leaders announce peace. No. War ends when all the actors agree on what peace means. And right now, they do not agree. Trump needs one image. He needs to look like the deal maker. The man who ended the war, the man who reopened Hormuz, the man who got Iran to back down without creating another endless American ground war. He needs that image for American voters. He needs it for Wall Street. He needs it for oil markets. He needs it for allies who are tired of chaos. So Trump has to say, deal close. He has to say, Hormuz opens. He has to say, Iran no longer wants the bomb. That is his role. Iran needs a completely different image. Iran cannot look like it surrendered because Washington shouted loudly enough. Iran needs to look like it survived. Iran needs to look like it absorbed pressure, held the line, used Hormuz, forced negotiations, and extracted terms. So Iran has to slow the story down. Iran has to say, not so fast. Iran has to say, the timeline is not fixed. Iran has to signal, you do not get to announce victory before the terms are settled. That is Iran's role. Israel needs a third image. Israel cannot look like it was sacrificed for Trump's headline. Israel cannot look like Washington traded away its freedom of action. So Israel has to appear uneasy, independent, resistant to restrictions, still capable of acting. That is Israel's role. And the Gulf states need a fourth image. They do not care about speeches. They care about shipping. They care about insurance. They care about oil flow. They care about whether tankers actually move. That is their role. So what are we watching? We are watching different actors perform different versions of the same deal for different audiences. That is war framing. And this is where the old trick stops working. The old trick is simple. Declare victory early. Control the headline. Force the weaker state to react. Make every negotiation look like surrender. Make every concession look like generosity. Make every compromise look like American strength. That trick worked many times before, but this time, Iran appears to understand the trick. So Iran is not just negotiating terms. Iran is negotiating the meaning of the terms. And that is why not yet matters. Do not underestimate those two words. Not yet. Those are not weak words. Those are control words. Because if Trump says the deal is ready, but Iran says not yet, Iran controls the suspense. If Trump says Hormuz opens, but Iran says the terms are not complete, Iran controls the price. If Trump says Iran gave up, but Iran says negotiations continue, Iran controls the interpretation. This is not confusion, this is structure. And to understand that structure, I want to introduce a concept. The concept is called narrative escalation. Narrative escalation happens when the physical battlefield becomes too costly, so the conflict moves into the story battlefield. Instead of asking, who fired the last missile? You ask, who gets credit for stopping the missiles? Instead of asking, who controls Hormuz? You ask, who forced Hormuz to reopen? Instead of asking, who compromised? You ask, who made compromise look like victory? That is narrative escalation. And right now, that is exactly where we are. The missiles may slow down, the headlines speed up, the naval crisis may pause, the meaning crisis begins, the war does not disappear, it changes form. And this is the key sentence. The deal is not the end of the war. The deal is the new battlefield, okay? That is the point. Because if Trump gets to define the deal, Trump wins politically. If Iran gets to define the deal, Iran survives strategically. If Israel gets to reject parts of the deal publicly while accepting parts privately, Israel preserves its image. If the Gulf states get tankers moving again, they do not care who won the press conference. And if China gets predictable energy flows, Beijing quietly benefits from everyone else's exhaustion. So the question is not, is there a deal? The question is, whose story does the deal serve? Now let me put the pieces together. Piece number 1. Trump announces confidence. He presents the deal as close. He connects it to Hormuz reopening. He frames Iran as moving away from nuclear confrontation. That is the public victory frame. Piece number 2. Iran slows the announcement. It does not fully accept the American timeline. It signals that more discussion may be required. It refuses to let Washington finalize the meaning before the terms are locked. That is the resistance frame. Piece number 3. Hormuz remains central. Why? Because Hormuz is the leverage point. If the strait opens, the world wants to know why. Did American force open it? Did Iran agree to open it? Did sanctions relief buy the opening? Did shipping guarantees buy it? Did frozen assets unlock it? That question matters. Piece number 4, Israel becomes the pressure point. If the deal requires restraint in Lebanon or reduces escalation against Iran-linked targets, then Israel has a domestic problem, because Israeli leaders cannot look like they were ordered to stand down by Washington. So Israel must protect its own story. Piece number 5, the markets are watching the reality, not the press release. Oil markets do not care about a slogan. Shipping insurers do not care about Trump's confidence. Tankers do not move because a politician wants a headline. They move when risk changes. So if Hormuz does not normalize in practice, the framing failed. That is why the thumbnail says, "Old trick don't work." Because the old trick was to announce the political ending before the strategic ending was real. But this time, the strategic ending is contested. And here is the fatal flaw in Trump's peace deal. Not that a deal cannot happen. A deal can happen. Not that Hormuz cannot reopen. It can reopen. Not that Iran cannot accept limits. It can accept limits. The fatal flaw is this: every side needs the deal to mean a different thing. Trump needs surrender. Iran needs survival. Israel needs independence. Gulf states need stability. China needs continuity. Markets need certainty. Those are not the same needs. And when one agreement carries 6 different meanings, the paper may be signed before the conflict is actually resolved. That is the danger. This is why mainstream media keeps missing the real story. They ask, will the deal be signed? That is the shallow question. The deeper question is, what does the signature mean? They ask, will Hormuz reopen? The deeper question is, who gets credit for reopening it? They ask, did Trump win? The deeper question is, why is Iran still controlling the timeline? They ask, is the war ending? The deeper question is, what form is the war taking next? That is the real story. And now I want to give you 3 very specific things to watch in the next 72 hours, because this is how you test a geopolitical theory. You do not just make claims, you make predictions and see whether reality follows. Prediction number 1. Watch Iran's language, not the American headline, not the cable news summary, not the social media clips. Watch Iran's language. If Iran starts using language that sounds like surrender, if it allows the deal to be described as total American pressure succeeding, if it allows Washington to define the nuclear terms, if it stops emphasizing sovereignty, sequencing, asset relief, or mutual obligations, then Theory 1 becomes stronger. That would mean Trump really did force the frame. But if Iran continues saying the timeline is not fixed, the terms matter, sanctions relief matters, Hormuz is conditional, and sovereignty is preserved, then Theory 2 becomes stronger. That would mean Iran is not accepting the victory lap story. So watch the words. The words are not decoration. The words are the battlefield. Prediction number 2. Watch Israel's behavior, not the speeches. Behavior. If Israel quietly reduces operations connected to Lebanon or Iran-linked targets, then the deal may contain real restraint mechanisms. And if that happens, it means Iran may have extracted something serious. But if Israel continues escalating while Trump still claims peace, then the deal may be more political theater than strategic settlement. So do not watch only what Israeli officials say. Watch what Israeli forces do. Statements are theater. Movement is data. Prediction number 3, watch shipping insurance and oil behavior. Not one oil price headline, not one market bounce. Watch whether insurers believe Hormuz is actually safer. Watch whether tankers reroute back. Watch whether Gulf shipping normalizes. Because markets are often more honest than politicians. Politicians sell stories. Markets price risk. If the deal is real, the risk should fall. If the risk does not fall, the headline is ahead of the reality. And if the headline is ahead of the reality, then the war framing theory is winning. Now let me bring all of this into one picture. Trump says, deal close. Iran says, not so fast. Hormuz says, what is the price? Israel says, what restrictions are hidden inside this? The Gulf says, will ships actually move? China says, will energy flows stabilize? And the media says, please give us one simple headline. But there is no simple headline, because this is not just diplomacy. This is a contest over who gets to write the ending, and that is why this moment matters. The war may be slowing down on paper, But the fight over the meaning of the war is accelerating, and if you understand that, then you understand why Iran's hesitation is not a minor detail. It is the central detail. Iran is not simply negotiating the deal. Iran is negotiating the story of the deal. That is what Washington did not want. Washington wanted the old sequence: pressure, announcement, victory frame, media repetition, global acceptance. But Iran interrupted the sequence, not by firing another missile, by saying wait. And sometimes in diplomacy, wait is the most powerful word in the room, because wait means you do not control the timeline. Wait means you do not control the language. Wait means you do not control the meaning. And that is why the old trick does not work the same way anymore. Here is your homework, and I mean this seriously. Do not just watch the headline that says, peace deal close. Put four things side by side: Trump's announcement, Iran's response, Israel's behavior, the market reaction. Then ask yourself one question: are these four things moving in the same direction? If they are, the deal is real. If they are not, the deal may be a frame before it is a fact. And if you find anything that contradicts this argument, bring it to the comments. Seriously, challenge it, because I am not asking you to agree with me. I am asking you to ask better questions. The mainstream question is, did Trump get a deal? But the real question is, who needs you to believe the deal is already done? And who benefits if the world thinks the war is over before the terms are actually settled? That is the real question. And I think if you sit with that question long enough, if you watch the timing, the language, the Hormuz terms, the Israeli reaction, the sanction sequencing, and the market response, you will start to see something the nightly news is not built to show you. The peace deal may be real, but the framing is already failing. The war may be ending on paper, but the war over meaning has just begun. I'll see you in the next one.